Hi guys, welcome to Grief and Potluck podcast. We are in 2021 because Lord knows we all got pretty tired of 2020. Sad. It's real sad. So I drink like a lady from my Contigo mug. Took the top off. I know. Some of you have seen me sip coffee or water through my happy mugs, and sometimes, I don't know. Well, when you go down the rabbit hole of YouTube, welcome if you are on said rabbit hole. I understand. Right there with you. When you go on a rabbit hole of YouTube and you come across your peoples that you've listened to, and they happen to be about being ladylike and good stuff like that. And she's like, sipping from so sip from a glass, sip from a cup, single rim, bottle is just not pretty. Right, don't be perverted back there when I said rim. But nonetheless, Contigo, good mugs, happen to have had a couple in the past. Like all good things made these days. So far, this one's lasting quite a while. So I am doused. I know. You're like, gross. Okay. Grief and Potluck podcast. I will be more appropriate. Moving on. So hopefully you have been able to watch the fashion video. I'm not sure which one I'm going to put up first, this one or that one. Nonetheless, here we are. La, la, la. That said, we did talk about in the last podcast, which I think we're on 7 now. 7, 8. So 5 or 6. I know, I can't keep them straight. All right, so podcast 5 or 6, we were talking about funeral planning. So, resource. And we stopped off in chapter 2, which talked about options and choices. Sorry, that was 3. Keep myself straight. No. 2. That much I can remember without my notes. So, we went over chapter 1 and chapter 2, and now we're in chapter 3, which is options and choices. And if this is your first time here, hi, welcome to the Grief and Potluck podcast. This is affiliated with the Celebrations of Life magazine.com. I emphasize the S on celebrations, just so you don't miss it, because that's how you have to look it up. Celebrations of Life magazine.com. Super. So thanks for joining. As I was saying, this is our affiliation, and that is the website. And we have other things on the YouTubes, which are nature walks, in case you can't get out or you need to get out, but you need some inspiration to get out. Currently in Florida, which is where I reside. It's chilly outside. I ain't good now. It's chilly. I'm not bundled appropriately yet. However, it would be interesting to go see the pretty garden that I did show in one of my videos previously in regards to how it looks in the winter. I know. I'm forcing myself to get outside. Can you tell? Can you tell? Yeah. All right, I made sure I had no spinach in my teeth. Here we go. Chapter 3, options and choices. No, I don't read this to you verbatim. You're adults out there in the wide world we live in. You can do that yourself. All right. So, nonetheless, this gentleman, Cochran, Don Cochran, had been in the funeral profession for quite a while. And so, hence, he writes from experience. And so, hence, I felt like, good resource, experience equals knowledge. Yeah. So, the choice of a funeral home is usually based on a previous family contact. It might even be based on religion, ethnic preferences, or personal friendships. Once the initial choice was made, the purchaser could expect to follow a path set by custom and consistency. The body would be embalmed, clothed, and placed in a casket for private or public viewing. Then the funeral service was conducted with clergy or ritual guidance, rites, depending on what your religious practices are. And then the burial. And there we are. Final disposal, separating the arrangements, and off you went. In the 60s and 70s, changes began to occur. Public perception of death, dying, and the funeral service industry underwent a transformation. The religious convictions and beliefs of a great deal of North American population were altered. Interesting. A funeral ceased to be a ritual focused on an afterlife and became instead one that celebrated the accomplishments of this life. So, I'm on trend. Now, all that said, funeral corporations were purchasing traditional family-owned or independent one-owner funeral homes. These large groups also purchased cemeteries, built crematoriums, and encouraged one-stop shopping. Even independent firms began to move to a multi-location configuration in the same way doctors and lawyers form clinics or law partnerships, etc. So this also began to alter the funeral service environment. Corporate thinking brought innovation, modern marketing plans, and sales strategies. So true. The public attitude was changing, the industry was changing, and the world was changing. The key to survival was to adapt. So, here we are. These are things that happened traditionally. Embalming. Everybody, with very few exceptions, used to be embalmed. It was a standard practice. We never asked permission, and only bodies being investigated for medical or legal reasons were exempt. We did not charge for it, as it was considered overall basic service. Embalming accomplished three major objectives of the funeral director: sanitation, preservation, and beautification of you. Gross. It also fit the requirements for public viewing in an open casket. Yeah, because I sure don't want to. No. No. I don't want to look at you. You're shrunken in, you're sinking in, you're decaying because it's just a body, unfortunately. You're not going to be all this. You're going to lose the chin. Oh, good times, right? Moving on. Today, few bodies are automatically embalmed. There is no legal requirement to embalm, aside from the requirement for certain shipping situations. It's not necessary. So, hence, cremation is an alternative and has reduced the need for embalming. My ear itches. Oh. All right. Cremation. Difficult to believe most cases in the past, other than in large cities, cremation was not available. That is hard to believe because everybody now has a crematorium attached if you have a funeral home. or have a partnership with a crematorium. As a funeral director, it really had little to do with service I provided. It meant that instead of a hearse going to the cemetery, it went to a railway station. I contacted the crematory and did the necessary paperwork, but it certainly didn't add or detract from my costs. So, even had to ship it away further down the road. So, in preparing this book, which is based on an in depth review of present funeral industry practices, the increase in cremations has been the biggest surprise of all. So, basically, back in like 1970, only 5% of families, approximately in Canada, just so you're aware, chose cremation. In 2000, in the year 2000, 20 odd years ago now. Approximately half chose cremation. So, according to Don, he explains the process as it's down to cost and the advantages in a later chapter. But of course, now there are more crematoriums, so it's not unusual. Prearranged funerals, mind you, again, we are in the chapter 3, options and choices. So prearranged is basically getting it done ahead of schedule, which is kind of one of the things we focus on here. There is still some resistance, but with the growth of self-help and do-it-yourself industries, all life situations are questioned. And the final disposal of a human remain is becoming an unimportant part of estate, retirement, and financial planning. The baby boom generation is now burying its parents and has made discussion of the subject a legitimate and important step. So, as with most things in time, sometimes things happen in a timeline that hadn't happened previously. So, now we're down to memorial and commemorative services. A funeral is really a number of steps in a process, and the word funeral denotes the gathering of family and friends for a memorial or commemorative service. I give it to them. And most would be held in religious institutions, but the funeral industry began building chapels within their establishment and basically, 4 walls and a place to put some chairs or pews and a chapel. So they would have both, essentially. So you would have your chapel looking space and your non-chapel looking space, because people, they don't practice the religions. He attended a personal funeral of a friend who was a businessman, which was held in a large conference room at a downtown hotel. It was conducted by friends and family, and no funeral home personnel were in attendance. The urn containing the cremated remains was present and was placed beside a frame with a picture depicting highlights of his life. The music was non-religious but appropriate, and there were a few vases of flowers. I found it to be very personal, intimate, and in keeping with his views and personality. The family had made choices from options that were not possible or considered proper in the past, which is so true. Now we move on. Corporate ownership. The funeral industry is a business that offers services and goods in a professional manner. Traditionally, funeral homes have been sole proprietorships or family businesses, passed down generation after generation. Yeah, we used to live in that type of situation where pretty much if you wanted to learn a business, you had to go apprentice to get the education to know what to do for said business. That was a fact. Or your father did it and you learned from him. I know. I hear it. Mm. All right. So, back in the yonder days of life, why did women not go into the workforce? It's quite simple. Because women were raising the children. Facts of life. You needed these children because you had farmland and so you needed help on the farm, or you were in an industry of a trade and you passed that on to your next generation who had a kid of whom you would pass it on to. And so for the women, provided, excuse me, a random itch, comfort, companionship. You know, we know how to cook. Men don't like to clean. We had our skill sets, they had theirs. They would go out and hunt the food. You just had to know to cook it. Not a bad gig. Now, that's not how we live. So things are different. Okay, calm down. And we had wars. And when wars happened, the men went to war and the women learned to do practically everything the men had done. So therefore the industries existed. I know. Baby boomers, you know this. But current generations are somehow not taught some of these things that, I mean, if you just know the history, it makes sense of what people did and why they did it. Now, we're in this time period. This is why we do these things, because they did in that time period. And as time goes down, here we are. There are 5 large funeral corporations, approximately, within the U.S., and they contain a lot of funeral homes and cemeteries. The public, however, don't seem to be too concerned about the ownership issue, but are focused more on the value for the money and the high standard of service, regardless of the funeral provider. Which, in the United States of America, I would have to concur because, think about it, how do you shop? In the United States of America, if you go to one store and you find, say, this top for $10, you might say, hey, that's a great deal. I like it. It looks like it's worth that value. I will buy it. If you go to another store and you find same said top for $50, and $50 is not your price point and not your budget of life, you might go, I'm not paying $50 for that. That doesn't seem worth it to me. So it's different for people all over the world, let alone your pocketbooks can determine some things. All right, we've moved on to professional standards. So he graduated from a Canadian embalming school, and at the time it was the only one in Canada. Isn't that interesting? Canadian School of Embalming, if you must know, in Toronto, Ontario. So he looked to the United States, but he didn't want to go to the private ones. So today, most states and provinces require licensing regarding this for quality training and service, you know. Funeral service associations in both countries and other organizations are dedicated to offering the public the most honest, professional, and open representation possible. The funeral industry does continue to evolve, driven by the changing views, perceptions, and needs of its customers. So, things we shall see. As new things have happened, the funeral industry has changed since this book. If you really want to get down to brass taxes, it's called the Green Burial, of which, if you look at the website, celebrationsoflifemagazine.com, I did an article on just that, more like a call with lovely people who run a green burial site here in Florida. Recommended to listen. All right, chapter 4, the 3 steps to funeral planning. So, apparently death presents us with 2 basic challenges, according to Don. The first is the physical and deals with the disposition, which is the nice word for disposal, of the body or human remains. The second challenge is spiritual and emotional, and is for the benefit of those we leave behind. And so, for this reason, we hold services so that the grief-stricken may deal with their sense of loss. Don't know why my voice is trying to give out just now. I apologize. Nature. So, I'm going to read the sidebar notes. Oh, I got it back. Hey, there we are. 3 steps in the funeral process. Choice of a funeral home. Service of remembrance. Optional. Final disposition. Cremation or burial. Step 1, disposition. No matter the place, the circumstance, or the degree of surprise, a tremendous emotional impact is felt the moment you accept the inevitability of death, whether death is sudden or unexpected. So, what are you going to do with the body? That's a choice. Choice we talked about. Oh. That was random. Random alarms. So, when you have chosen your funeral professional, he or she will assist you in those necessary matters to progress to the second and third steps. So, removal from the place of death to a funeral home. So, that said, when I was speaking with the green burial person, the situation at large is you do need a funeral director. So, let's say you died in the hospital. Obviously, that's dealt with. But you died in your home. You have to call to get the body removed. It's a process. You can get the body back, but the process is you do need the funeral director because there are some legal paperwork mumbo jumbo things that have to be filled out, and in so doing, needs to be done by the person who has said title, who knows that business, and that's their job. So if for no other reason, that's the job, and that's what they can help you with. So, removal from the place of death to a funeral home, including storage of the body prior to the final disposition. So, if you didn't die in a hospital and you didn't get shoved down to the morgue, even from the morgue, if you are going to have yourself a funeral at a funeral home, the funeral home has to come pick you up at the morgue. But nonetheless, if you are in the home and you've rearranged all this and it's all natural and there's no suspiciousness regarding your demise, then funeral home comes and gets you. And obviously, you die on a Monday and there's no pre-planned anything. People got to make some decisions between Tuesday and Wednesday. And then you may have a funeral on Friday, or you may not. So if you die on a Monday, it may be Sunday that you get your funeral. People have to come in from out of state if they want to. I know we're in a time of 2021, rounded off after, you know what, crap year. Things are different. I get it. So obviously, funeral homes had to adapt and deal with Zoom, Skype, the methods that exist to get you to do this on a camera so you can see the situation at large. So that exists. I must have a flea. I have a random itch. Sorry. Don't. Blah, right? I do warn you, I have a sense of humor on the website. So that's that. Speaking of which, let's take you there now. Ta-da! Yes. So the February issue is up. This is making the end of life a celebration, creating safe conversations around death and dying. Yeah. Warning. Right there. Warning. A sense of humor will come into this. I just can't help it. It's who I am. All right. Moving on. Then there's the arrangement to gather the information because there's such a thing called a medical certificate of death. Medical certificate of death. Flipped it around. People end up calling it a death certificate for short. So, that's super important. I recommend no less than 10 copies from experience. No, just I recommend it. It's a recommendation. It's personal choice. Your call, but you have to get those things to the bank. You have to get those things to a lawyer. And everybody gets a copy. So it's not like you get a copy and then you make photocopies. Everybody gets a copy. So it's on record. So banks get a copy, lawyer gets a copy if these are things you have to deal with. Another family member might want a copy because they may have something to deal with in another state. Like maybe now you chose to be buried in this state, but they have to go figure out how to get your stuff sold in the other state because now you're not getting buried in that state. So that cemetery may want proof that you're dead and you're done and you don't want to be in that state, but you want to be in that state. I'm just saying, you never, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff. There's still a lot of stuff I don't know. Hence, I'm learning, and hence this process of togetherness in this matter. So, certificate of death, registration of death, cremation or burial permits, and official death certificates. So, again, I personally would recommend no less than 10 copies, especially if this person that passed away has a lot of assets, like homes, has a lot of, well, assets are assets, properties, stuff, things to deal with. If they have siblings or other family members. And again, like I mentioned, the bare bones fact is you need it for the banks, you need it for the lawyers, you need it for possibly the hospital. It's a topic. We will conquer it in the near future. Is it on my list? What do we got? What do we got? We got all kinds of things to talk about. I'm telling you. Just when you think it's putting a body in the ground, there's more. All right. So, death certificate 101. We'll get there. Probably Dawn does too. I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt it. He may not. But we have talked about briefly, and we will talk about it again, what you need to gather and cultivate together for said death certificate. Because it's a lot of intel. All right, back to it. Where were we? Choice of a funeral home. The choice of a funeral home represents your choice. If you're dead and you hadn't picked out anything, it represents your family's choice or your next of kin to figure it out. So, that said, have you dealt with this funeral home before and or know somebody who has, and were they satisfied? What is their standing in the community? Because that used to be super important. And sort of is still, of course, because essentially you die, but maybe 20 of your friends come to your funeral, and 20 of your friends, how they're dealt with at this funeral can determine their desire to ever step foot back into that particular funeral home. So let's say everybody they encountered at that funeral home, for one reason or another, was just completely rude. Let's say you had a very special religious situation and you were having this religious service and they were just talking smack. All you could hear them talking smack about the funeral service and such. And so naturally your 20 friends are like, "Oh my gosh, they were so insulting." You know, about whatever funeral practice you decided to practice while you were getting buried, and therefore now that 20 times over goes back out into the community and gets talked about. You know, bad news travels faster than good news, as they like to say. So that's that. So, standing in the community, do you care? If you do, you know. Does the funeral home and its staff hold a valid license? That's a good question. Yeah. Like, are they up to date on their licensing? Will they provide you an itemized price list? Now, I find this super important. Actually, having gone to a job interview to be a pre-sales consultant at one point, uh, yeah, you want to see the price that you're supposedly paying because you don't want to make hyper emotional choices. It's just not fair to anybody. So hence getting some of this stuff done ahead of schedule. Super nice. All right. Where were we? Do they offer all the services that you require? Let's hope so. But if you have some wild and crazy ideas or you have some religious situation that they're not familiar with, you know, shop around if nobody's familiar, but somebody's willing. That's kind of where you're at. If you choose Memorial Society, do they have the contact information for the funeral home that handles the society's business? I am not sure what a Memorial Society is. But since we're in front of a computer, we can Google it. Taking a moment. What is a memorial society? A memorial society is an association of like-minded people from all walks of life who respect the need for a simple, dignified alternative to elaborate, increasingly costly funeral services. Okay. So basically, it's just not a funeral. home situation. Maybe private, but you may want help, i.e., a party planner or a funeral planner. So, there's that. Then there is information gathering. Planning in advance allows you time to gather all this information together and plan. Documents such as birth, marriage, divorce certificates are sometimes needed. Significant records must also be located, military service records, as well as family connections. Your funeral director can guide you through these informational and registration requirements. So if you've made no plans, this kind of stuff your family's got to deal with. So put your stuff together in a spot. Best case scenario, recently thought about this myself, because I'm not saying I'm all pre-planned up either. So make photocopies of your stuff. You could put your real stuff in a lockbox or keep your real stuff organized in a 3-ring binder with those plastic clear slaps? Pockets. You know, photocopies possibly somewhere else safe because heaven forbid there is a fire. Everything gets burned up on fire. It is a pain in the butt to go get stuff after the fact. There's also a full biographical information sheet on Appendix A. Super. Where's Appendix A? Oh, it's back here. My bad. Still not there yet. All right, Appendix A, page 67. Information required for registration of death. Hey, I knew Dawn would come through for us. So, that's a lot. I'm going to take a picture and put that on the website. What is the website? Celebrationsoflifemagazine.com. All right. So that needs to go up because there's a lot to know. I did do a thing about it, but this is the most basic. All right. We're rolling past 30 minutes, so I'm going to push pause and do part B. So part A. And now we're moving on to B. I'm writing that down. All right. So we are on page 20. Just because people's attention span, I get it, time and effort, you're busy, you have a schedule, you have a life. So there will be A and there will be B. And then whether this is podcast 7, 8, or 9, I will put 7A and 7B. So you'll be very aware that this is where this picks up. Okay? So we are on, as stated before, chapter. You know, I should just look at the beginning of my chapter. That'd be very smart. We are on chapter 4 regarding the 3 steps to funeral planning. And we're just kind of jumping on the highlights and going forward. Is there much more? Let's see if I could finish this out. No, it's part B. All right, people. Thank you so much for joining us on the Grief and Potluck podcast. If you caught the fashion video, you'll know what this little pretty pinky impress nails is all about. So catch that fashion visual aid podcast regarding what to wear. Primarily, I am a woman, so it's for the ladies. But I should do one for the men. I will eventually, I promise. Men, I just have to say, it's a little less hard for you. A little less. It's less hard to make a decision about what to wear. But nonetheless, we're going to wrap up A. We're going to move on to B. So thank you again for joining Grief and Potluck Podcast. Yes. So this rounds out part A